What if I told you that the wealthiest individual on planet Earth is not simply a lucky mechanical engineer who builds electric cars, but a ruthless apex predator, executing a masterclass in game theory designed to completely monopolize the foundational infrastructure of the human race? Welcome to Money's Hidden Past. Rich people lied. We fact-checked. Today we are stripping away the public relations mythology of billionaires to expose the exact mathematical strategy of the ultimate corporate empire. When you look at the modern financial landscape of 2026, the traditional rules of corporate capitalism have been completely rewritten. We are witnessing the violent consolidation of wealth on a scale so massive that it completely shatters our standard understanding of a global monopoly. The rich people on television want you to fundamentally believe that billionaires acquire their vast fortunes by simply inventing a better product and successfully selling that specific product to a happy consumer on a completely fair and balanced competitive open market. But the historical fact check reveals that the open market is a total illusion. The true titans of history do not care about building a better consumer product. They care about building an inescapable structural cage around the consumer and charging a mandatory daily toll to absolutely everyone operating inside it. In the highly mathematical and competitive world of academic game theory, the absolute ultimate and undeniable dominant winning strategy is to aggressively acquire the foundational infrastructure of the game itself so that your bitter corporate rivals are mathematically forced to pay you. Rent economists refer to this ruthless strategy as closed-loop dominance. It is a massive, vertically integrated corporate structural flywheel where every single piece of your empire feeds directly into another piece, completely eliminating your financial reliance on any outside external vendors to truly understand how this closed-loop dominance functions. In real time, we have to look at the staggering corporate events of 2026. Specifically, the unprecedented $1.25 trillion corporate merger, officially combining the massive aerospace dominance of SpaceX with the intelligence of XAI. This was not just another massive financial transaction for the stock market. It was the final architectural piece of a planetary infrastructure puzzle linking four seemingly separate and massive technology companies into a single unified and completely self-sustaining sovereign machine. Every single artificial intelligence model requires a massive amount of training data. You cannot build a sovereign digital brain without continuous human conversational input, which is exactly why the expensive acquisition of the social platform previously known as Twitter was not a terrible financial mistake, but a highly calculated strategic acquisition. The social media platform provides a relentless and continuous river of data, capturing the real-time emotional and intellectual conversations of humanity, funneling that raw psychological information directly into the private corporate servers, feeding the incredibly hungry digital brain of the artificial intelligence system. But processing that incomprehensible ocean of real-time global human data requires an absolutely staggering amount of physical computer hardware. If you rely on outside vendors for your silicon processing chips, you leave your entire corporate empire highly vulnerable to supply chain disruptions. So the empire relies on the manufacturing power of the Tesla Corporation, building custom advanced artificial intelligence chips directly in-house and powering those massive localized server farms with proprietary custom battery architecture, specifically utilizing the highly advanced commercial battery known as the Megapack. Now you have the human data, the computer hardware, and the digital brain, but you still have to physically transmit that intelligence across the entire globe. If you use traditional fiber optic cables, you have to negotiate with local governments and pay massive expensive fees to the established global telecommunications monopolies. This is exactly where the aerospace dominance of SpaceX perfectly closes the loop, launching thousands of low Earth orbit communication satellites into the sky, creating the independent global communication network known worldwide as Starlink, beaming the data directly to the consumer without asking for government permission. The consumer generates the data on the independent social media platform. The custom artificial intelligence processes the data using the custom batteries, and the private satellite network transmits the data back to the consumer, completely bypassing every single traditional corporate vendor on the planet. But the ultimate tactical play is happening right now, far above our heads. The highly anticipated initial public offering of the SpaceX Corporation is specifically designed to fund the most ambitious infrastructure project in history. The aggressive deployment of massive orbital data centers floating in deep space, placing massive computer servers directly into the freezing vacuum of space, brilliantly solves the two greatest physical limitations of modern artificial intelligence: the desperate need to constantly keep the incredibly hot computer servers cool, and the desperate need for an absolutely infinite supply of cheap electricity. In space, the ambient temperature naturally hovers incredibly close to absolute zero, providing an unlimited free cooling system for the massive silicon processors. And without the annoying earthly rotation blocking the bright sun, the orbital servers can draw continuous, endless solar power 24 hours a day by successfully owning the raw energy. The physical transport and the communication layer, the empire creates an impenetrable closed loop that suffocates the global competition, forcing rival technology companies into a weak and deeply submissive position where they are mathematically required to rent his infrastructure just to survive. If a competing company wants to launch their own advanced satellite network, they are physically forced to pay SpaceX to put their hardware into orbit, meaning the empire profits massively, even when its direct competitors succeed, placing a permanent, inescapable tax on the entire global technology sector. This level of ruthless vertical integration feels entirely unprecedented today, but it is actually the exact same aggressive corporate playbook, weaponized by the absolute most powerful historical titans of the past, proving that the underlying mechanics of extreme wealth consolidation never actually change. If we travel back to the late 19th century in the United States, we find a quiet and deeply calculating man named John D. Rockefeller who built the single largest private fortune in modern human history by aggressively executing this exact same strategy of closed-loop dominance. Rockefeller did not just want to pull raw crude oil out of the muddy ground. He ruthlessly acquired the massive industrial refineries that processed the oil he bought the sprawling railroad networks required to transport the heavy liquid, and he even purchased the physical forests to build his own wooden barrels. If a rival oil prospector managed to strike a massive successful well, they suddenly realized they could not physically transport their valuable product. Because Rockefeller owned the only train tracks leading out of the local town, forcing the desperate rival to sell their oil to Standard Oil at a massive loss. Rockefeller successfully achieved his unprecedented historical wealth by completely monopolizing the foundational commodities of the 20th century, controlling the physical fuel that fundamentally powered the Industrial Revolution, and dictating the exact terms of global commerce to the rest of civilized society. The modern orbital empire is running the exact same historical playbook today, but instead of aggressively cornering the market on dirty physical oil, it is aggressively monopolizing the core foundational commodities of the 21st century, which are compute power, satellite bandwidth, and absolute physical access to orbit. But while Rockefeller successfully controlled the energy of the physical world, the modern technological empire is attempting something significantly more dangerous. It is actively building the infrastructure to completely control the physical world, while simultaneously controlling the raw processing power of the digital human mind. To find a true historical parallel for this level of unilateral global leverage, we have to look significantly beyond the domestic corporate monopolies of the industrial age and look at the terrifying sovereign megacorporations of the 18th century. Specifically the legendary and brutal British East India Company. The East India Company was not just a massive commercial business entity, it operated as a ruthless quasi-state with its own private military infrastructure, capable of dictating global geopolitical terms to powerful sovereign nations, and completely ignoring the traditional boundaries of international diplomacy. They built a towering corporate empire that became completely indispensable, weaving themselves so deeply into the financial fabric of the British government that the royal crown became entirely dependent on their massive commercial success, establishing a terrifying historical precedent of state reliance on private enterprise. We are currently witnessing the exact same dangerous dynamic unfold today. The United States government relies heavily and completely on a single private company for vital access to the International Space Station and advanced military satellites, handing over billions of dollars in highly classified critical federal contracts. If the government wants to rescue stranded astronauts from a failing capsule or deploy an advanced surveillance network to monitor foreign military adversaries, they cannot rely on their own heavily defunded federal space agencies. They are physically forced to pick up the phone and call a private corporate executive. This grants the executive a level of unilateral state, like geopolitical power, that has not been witnessed on this planet since the violent age of the sailing empires, allowing a single unelected citizen to influence global military conflicts and independently decide which foreign countries receive critical satellite communication. When you successfully control the absolute physical choke points of human progress, you transcend the traditional limitations of a standard corporate chief executive officer. You become an indispensable and permanent pillar of the global sovereign security apparatus, making it politically impossible for the government to ever regulate or dismantle you. The wealthy elite, sitting comfortably on the financial news networks, want you to believe that the free market is an incredibly fair and open competitive landscape, where the best ideas always naturally rise to the absolute top of the hierarchy, and no single corporation can ever truly dominate the modern global economy. But the historical fact check proves that the ultimate goal of massive capital is not to compete fairly in a highly dynamic and open global market. The ultimate goal of massive consolidated capital is to destroy the open market, entirely replacing the concept of healthy competition with absolute dictatorial financial control. They quietly build an invisible iron cage of essential technological infrastructure and silently place it over the entire unsuspecting human population, forcing every single citizen and competing business to operate inside the cage, while the corporate empire comfortably collects a percentage of every single transaction. Whether you are a local merchant in the 17th century buying imported spices, a working class citizen in the 20th century buying standard heating oil, or a modern consumer relying entirely on satellite data and artificial intelligence, you are always mathematically paying a mandatory toll to the apex predator. At the top, the physical technology dramatically evolves, and the corporate names constantly change, but the fundamental mathematical game theory always remains exactly the same. Build the indispensable roads, control the primary source of the raw power, and patiently wait for the entire world to helplessly hand you their wealth. The $1.25 trillion corporate merger of 2026 is not the final end of the grand strategic technological game. It is simply the opening move of a brand new terrifying era of human history where sovereign global power is permanently transferred from the government to the corporation. If this deep dive into the absolute game theory of closed-loop dominance and the terrifying historical parallels to the greatest monopolies of the past opened your eyes to how absolute power is being consolidated, right now, then do me a massive favor. Right now, smash that like button to let the algorithm know this factual historical conversation matters. Share this video with every friend and family member who needs to understand how the real financial world operates. Let us keep exposing the true mechanics of wealth and power. I will catch you in the next one, where we break down the next hidden chapter in the long history of money and corporate authority. Until then, stay informed, stay skeptical, and remember that the people who control the infrastructure of the future will always fundamentally control the humans who blindly rely on it.